Good evening and a very warm welcome to this special In Conversation event. My name is Narissa Taysom and I manage the public programme for the Watts Gallery Artist Village, and I am delighted to welcome renowned painter-printmaker Anita Klein and her gallerist and director of Eames Fine Art, Vincent Eames, to speak to us tonight. And also I must extend my thanks to Watts Gallery Trust Director Alistair Burtenshaw for chairing tonight's talk. Before I hand over to Alistair to formally introduce Anita and Vincent, I wanted to say a few words about tonight's event. We are celebrating and delving into Anita Klein's extraordinary solo exhibition Together, which opened last month in Watts Contemporary Gallery, our commercial gallery space. The exhibition is a culmination of almost 2 years of conversation with Klein and brings together more than 80 paintings, works on paper and prints to explore themes that have always fascinated Klein: family, friendship, closeness, intimacy and touch, but made ever more pertinent given the last year that we have all experienced. The exhibition has been co-curated with Eames Fine Art, who have represented Klein for more than 20 years, and is accompanied by a beautiful catalogue, which you can purchase online if you so wish. The show is open until the 4th of July, so please do come and visit us if you're able to. And also the show is online. If you head to the Watts Gallery website and click on the shop, you can see all of the beautiful works there. Just a few reminders about this evening. This talk is being recorded and will be put online at a later date. We are running a Q&A this evening, and we'd really encourage you to ask your questions in the chat box, which is at the bottom, and we will chair the discussion at the end of the talk. And a reminder that if you're enjoying this evening's talk, please tweet us at Watts Gallery. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, Anita and Vincent. And now I will hand over to Alistair Burtenshaw.
Thank you, Narissa, and a very warm welcome to Anita and Vincent and to all of you for joining the Watts Gallery's Watts at Home programme. As you may know, the Watts Gallery Trust has a long history of supporting contemporary artistic practice. Our founders, Mary Watts and G.F. Watts, were pioneering contemporary artists in their own right. G.F. Watts, the leading portraitist of his age and a key figure in the symbolist movement, whilst Mary Watts was a designer, teacher, and advocate for craft education who created the Artist Village as a place of creativity and contemporary design. The Watts Contemporary Gallery is housed in the former Compton Pottery building, where Mary Watts founded the Compton Potters Arts Guild, a commercial and social enterprise that thrived until the 1950s and sold work all around the world. Today, our contemporary artistic programme includes contemporary installations in our historic galleries, commercial exhibitions, artist talks, funded residencies for emerging artists, and an extensive learning programme that takes contemporary artists into schools and universities, community groups, and prisons. All proceeds from our commercial programmes support this vital ecosystem, which at its heart is about supporting art for all, the founding mission and vision of our two artists. It is a great honour then to welcome Anita Klein to exhibit at Watts Contemporary Gallery in our first exhibition since reopening the gallery to the public following the pandemic. Known for her confident use of line, dazzling colour palette, and poignant subject matter, Klein explores the humour and beauty of the everyday. Describing her works as a visual diary, she captures personal celebrations from observations of motherhood to the joys of friendship, creating images and memories that are universally understood. Anita Klein studied at Chelsea School of Art and the Slade School of Art, where she was awarded the Henrique Scholarship in 1982 and 1983. Anita was elected Associate of the Royal Society of Painter-Printmakers in 1992, Fellow in 1995, and served as President of the Society from 2003 to 2006. Klein has exhibited worldwide, including at the ICA and Royal Academy in London, and public collections including the British Museum and Arts Council England. Anita Klein was awarded Printmaker of the Year at the 2020 Printfest International Festival of Printmaking, Next year, a major retrospective of Klein's prints, 40 years of printmaking, will be presented at Eames Fine Art, featuring over 1,200 prints made since 1982, when Klein was a student at the Slade. The exhibition will be accompanied by a catalogue raisonné with images of all the prints, so do look out for that. Vincent Eames is the founder and director of Eames Fine Art. He studied history of art at UCL, where he specialised in 20th and 21st century art, before going on to found Eames Fine Art in 2004 with his wife and fellow art historian, Rebecca. The gallery is now based in Bermondsey Street in central London. Eames Fine Art specialises in the work of established masters of modern and contemporary art, with a focus on works on paper, etchings, lithographs, and drawings. As well as sourcing works from collections worldwide, they offer collectors and first-time buyers a varied portfolio of original works. Eames Fine Art has a thriving exhibition programme, regularly working with contemporary artists and the estates of artists. These include Norman Ackroyd, Salvador Dali, Matisse, Barbara Hepworth, Howard Hodgkin, Elizabeth Frink, and Anita Klein. Eames have represented Anita for over 20 years. So thank you again to Anita and to Vincent for joining us for this very special event. And Anita, Vincent, over to you.
Alistair, thank you very much. I'm hoping that you can hear me there. Anita, hello.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
I can indeed. What a lovely opportunity to have a chat together again and to reflect on this wonderful show together. I'd just like to thank you to Alistair and Narissa and the team at Watts for doing such a beautiful job with the show. It's nice to be able to reflect on your work in a different context, I suppose, outside of our usual gallery program. So it's been wonderful to do that. Sorry, just to get my video going. I hope you can see me now. That would be that. There we are. And Anita.
Yeah, and there I am.
Good. So take two. Anyway, yeah. So wonderful to be collaborating on this show. And I think the first thing we need to point out, though, is that this isn't as originally planned, is it? I mean, we were
not quite. No, I think that the show was supposed to be March, April 2020, which, as we all know, was the beginning of an event that none of us could have ever envisaged or planned for, and it was cancelled, postponed for, well, just over a year. And in that time, I did lots of new work. We kept in touch between us and the Watts Gallery. And when it seemed that this was going to be possible to put on as the opening show for the Watts Gallery, we had to think about whether the pandemic had changed our plans, didn't we? And the idea of calling the show together, I think, was my idea. Really just because this being together with people was something that we'd all suddenly realized, we'd suddenly missed and suddenly realized how important it was. So it wasn't so much that my work changed, but I did select different work for this show than I would have a year ago.
That was the first question I really wanted to address, was that there was a change of direction, obviously, due to events. But it did, and you mentioned this was more about figures together rather than figures alone. You wanted to bring a selection of works where people are together, I suppose, rather than some of the other works you'd originally intended. What I want to do is just share a presentation of works that we have here, so people can take a look at work while we're chatting away. I guess the point is, has the lockdown and has the hiatus in when the show was originally due to be hosted, when it actually happened, did that prompt a change at all in the way that you work?
There was a change in that before the pandemic, my habit had been to do all my paintings in my studio in Italy, which I had up until last March, this wonderful routine of going once a month to paint completely alone in Italy. My work is not from looking, so it was nothing to do with the light or what I could see out of the window, but really as a kind of retreat and a way of getting away from all the pressures to make a living out of my work, to organize exhibitions, and also to kind of repeat myself. I think that I found I'd been doing that for 15 years actually before last year, and I found that having the time to be completely alone gave me the opportunity to play and experiment more with paintings that I might have thought wouldn't work and I didn't have time to try in London. So Italy has been a place of play for me, but I have been quite pleasantly surprised that I'm still able to paint in London, and I have continued to paint despite not being able to go to Italy for a year. But the paintings that I've done in the past year, it's a bit early to say whether they're very different, but they've certainly continued a theme for me of what my work has always been, what I would miss if my lovely ordinary life was for some reason taken away from me. And then of course it has been, or a very important part of my everyday life has been taken away, especially during the lockdowns when I wasn't able to see my children, my grown-up children and grandchildren. And I have painted rather than what I would normally be doing, of trying to capture small moments that I wanted to celebrate and hold on to and appreciate out of my ordinary life. I was painting more moments that I was really missing, and events that I was really missing in being together with my family.
But I suppose the visual mode, the way of actually working wasn't particular. I mean, I've got here a piece from 2017, The Doll's House, which features in the show. And we have also, let's have a look here, sorry. We also have New Shoes here from 2017. Again, predating the lockdown. Lovely, wonderful work, and I think sums up a lot of the themes that you were just talking about. But then we come to 2020. This is a work produced during lockdown, T for 3.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, your work hasn't changed from a visual point of view, though, is what I'm trying to get at. So
no, not at all. I think actually what has happened is that maybe the rest of the world has kind of caught up with my way of thinking a bit. You know, I am always for some reason far more aware of the precariousness of everyday life, and the kind of need for gratitude and counting my blessings in my intimate relationships. And I suppose it's not, obviously I didn't know that anything like the pandemic would ever happen, but now that we've all experienced what I have always dreaded, I suppose many more people seem to be contacting me and saying that works of mine, not necessarily done in the last year, but works of mine generally, have begun to mean a lot to them when they've had this experience of being separated from their families.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because I think you put it beautifully, actually, when we were talking about this, that the subject of this show is not so much about what you would miss, it's actually what you do miss. And that it's really, this whole situation has brought home the fundamentals about your work, which is cherishing those moments with family, with people that are close to you. And this whole situation has put that into sharp relief now that that's been removed. So in fact, your work and what it's about, I mean, what happens in lockdown and to you as an artist is almost the perfect illustration, the perfect platform for your message, I suppose, of what your work is fundamentally about.
Yes, I mean, I hesitate to use the word message because I'm not a great fan of conceptual art, and I'm not a great fan of the idea of art having a specific message. I think the beauty of visual art is that people can take their own message from things, and that can vary wildly from what the artist intended. I never intend a message, but I do have an obsessive preoccupation, which I think comes across as a message. I mean, I've been painting and printmaking pretty much every day for 40 years. And when in the early days, I really had no idea what my work was about. And this is something that you're often asked at art school. It's absolutely ludicrous to ask an 18-year-old, what is your work about? Because nobody has any idea apart from that they were the best at art in their school. But over the years, I have been able to see my work and see it in much greater quantity, obviously, look back and see certain patterns almost as if it wasn't me that did it. And so I can see that there is an overriding obsession, there is an overriding message that comes out. What I'm trying to do is something for myself rather than say something to other people. When I'm painting, I'm never really thinking about other people looking at the picture, but obviously the person who looks at and maybe eventually lives with the picture is going to bring their own story and their own message to it, and that's a kind of doubling of the quality of the thing. But to start with, when I'm painting it, it's for myself, and it's for myself to hang on to what are extremely fleeting moments often that we hardly notice in our everyday lives, and often things that are very ordinary. I actually find like the more ordinary the better. I think, you know, those of us who are old enough to have ever kept photo albums will know that if you flick through a family photo album, it looks a bit as if your life has been one long stream of birthday parties and holidays. And there's very rarely a photograph of anything very ordinary. This has changed a little bit since we all now have cameras with us on our phones all the time. But certainly for a long time, you would get, in the olden days, you would get your camera out for a special occasion. And I have some treasured photographs that are taken when somebody bought a new camera and was kind of just trying it out in the kitchen when someone else was making dinner. And when you look back at those photos, they're so much more precious than the photographs, the posed ones in front of the beautiful garden or the seascape or whatever it is. And I think that those sort of ordinary moments they're very important to me, and I think we maybe have all realised how important they are to all of us through the last year, because I suppose I've always imagined the worst. I've always imagined somehow my precious ordinary life and relationships, that something would go wrong, that it would all be taken away from me.
Sorry, that's
yeah,
sorry to interject, but I mean that certainly occurs to me when we look at a piece like this, Hugging the Children, where you're literally grasping hold of the precious moments that, I mean, this I think is a wonderful image from the show, Hugging the Children. That's from this year. It almost sits as a visual metaphor for what we're talking about, which is holding on to precious memories, precious moments that maybe take away, I guess, and that's what we're experiencing or have experienced over the last year or so. You've spoken about maybe this being related to your heritage, your family history, as being from a European Jewish refugee family in the Second World War, and how that was somehow present in, maybe subconsciously, while you've been formulating your visual sort of journey, as it were. Is that something that has come into sort of more sharper focus during this last year or so?
I don't think it's come into sharper focus. I really don't think that my work has changed very much over the past year. I've just been kind of sadder and missed my family more. But there certainly is a preoccupation with everything being taken away. And I think, again, as I was saying, you know, you can look back on your own work when you've had enough years of it and begin to see patterns. And I certainly do think there's something in the fact that I was born in 1960, which when I was a child seemed like the Second World War was, you know, ancient history, but actually it was 15 years after the war ended, which I now know is absolutely nothing. I mean, looking back, that would be 2006 now, which to me in my old age seems like yesterday. And I am the daughter of, my father was a refugee from Hungary, Romania, Jewish family, ended up in Australia, but lost relatives and obviously material possessions, basically escaped. My mother's family also Jewish, but English, but I think all Jewish families, probably all European families, were to some extent traumatized by the war. And my friends as well, my school friends, were many of them children of refugees who had made a new life in Australia. And so we were all, as children, very surrounded by the older members of the family's trauma and grief. And, you know, there would be conversations at my grandmother's house where suddenly she would cry and everybody would break into Hungarian. And I, you know, through my childhood, got to know a bit about what happened. And I always had in my head how lucky I was, and how that knock on the door in the middle of the night where suddenly everything that you thought was, that you could take for granted, would be taken away. And I do think that that's somewhere in me a very important part of why I do these pictures, because there's not a day goes by where I take my lovely privileged life for granted.
Yes, and I guess the subtext of that is that there is an essential precariousness to life, isn't there? And that is really perhaps the subject of what you're talking about. And I know you mentioned that you don't sermonize, you're not, you know, messages, as it were, aren't important. The viewer has to bring that, that understanding to the work, as it were. But I think you mentioned there was a priest who said that he would love his sermons to sound like or be like your pictures. Is that,
yes, this is lovely. I mean, I have, obviously as an artist, you have no control over what kind of person likes your work or buys your work, but I do sometimes get messages from people, and I have been surprised over the years how many of my works have ended up in hospitals, and how many of the collectors of my work turn out to be priests or rabbis or, you know, religious people. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I'm aware that this kind of message that we're talking about of gratitude and counting your blessings is very universal to all the major religions. And I was contacted by a priest last year who said, what I want my sermons to be like is your paintings, and particularly this year, this is what we're all missing. And if I could make people feel this gratitude like your pictures do, that would be, you know, something that he was aiming for, which was a really lovely comment.
I think that's wonderful, and that really chimed with me when you told me that story, because I think there is a message here. What I love about your work, and what many people love about your work, is that it does remind us that, you know, life is beautiful. It is also precious. So cherish it. You know.
Absolutely, yeah, and terribly fleeting, really. I mean, especially we're obviously all much more aware of that with young children because they grow so quickly, and I have 4 grandchildren who I'm very involved in their everyday lives usually, so lockdown interrupted that a lot, but they change so much, and I'm so aware that as a grandparent, by the time they go to school, you become quite peripheral. And obviously I hope that we continue the close relationship that we've had because I've looked after them from birth, but I'm cherishing every moment of their little lives even more because the time goes past so quickly as you get older.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you mentioned as well contact with people you love, contact
Yes.
with your loved ones is actually what makes us human. You know, that's what you reflect upon. You know, that's what it is to be human, is that it is encapsulated in these wonderful.
Yes, and particularly touch, actually. I mean, it's an odd thing to say for a visual artist, but the feeling of things, and particularly with children, but the physical feeling of things is more important to me than what things look like. And that has been something that has been obviously grossly interrupted this year.
You preempted me beautifully there, Anita, because I was going to move on next to ask you, so how do we get this feeling across? How do you make pictures that express these ideas? And yes, it's your the way you put this is that you're creating works that express what something feels like, not what it looks like. You say you're reluctant to call yourself a visual artist. Can you unpack that?
Yeah. Well, I never use photographs or models or a mirror. All my work is essentially self-portraits. I'm in nearly every picture I do in some way or other, but I don't intend the pictures to look like me, really. They're what I feel like physically rather than what I look like. And not only do I not use models or photographs, I have done, you know, inordinate amount of life drawing, so I suppose I kind of know how to draw a human body, but I don't care very much if the arm is too short or too long, or the leg, it wouldn't really bend that way. I'm aiming for
physical reality, or so.
Yeah, I mean, when I paint a picture like this planting seedlings that's on the screen right now, in order to do that, I would kind of get myself into that physical position and close my eyes and kind of feel what it feels like. And this is partly why it's very rare for me to ever put anybody in my pictures apart from my close family, because with other people in the pictures, I need to know what their bodies feel like too. It's more like the
physical contact.
The feeling of the little legs in my hands, or the feeling of just even the silkiness of the hair, or there's so much about my grandchildren in the pictures, or the other members of my family, which is about how they feel to me when I touch them rather than what they look like. And I mean, there are kind of what are they, certain characteristics of each person which my family will recognize who each one is usually. And I was quite surprised when my own daughters were growing up that they always knew which one of them was which in pictures, even though they had the same haircut and they were pretty much the same size. They always knew. It was very obvious to them, and it was very obvious to me. But it doesn't matter to me whether anybody else who doesn't know me, I don't want anybody to think, oh, I've got a picture of Anita Klein on my wall. It's what I'm hoping is that because I'm trying to paint what things feel like from inside, that other people will feel that feeling and see themselves in the picture rather than me.
I think maybe at this point, I'd like to bring this up. It sounds like an appropriate moment. Just another artist trying perhaps do something similar. Picasso, Mother and Child from 1921. You picked this out for a talk that you gave to us a few years ago now in the studio as one of the influences in your work. Picasso features regularly for artists, as I'm sure you're aware. But I mean, I think this, just reflecting back, you talked about what a child, your child or your grandchild feels like. I think this sums that up beautifully as well. I know this has been a favorite work of yours.
It really is a favorite of mine, and if only I could paint like that once in my whole life, I would be thrilled. Yes, I think one wonderful thing about Picasso that I really admire and that I would like to feel I could ever get close to is that every figure in his pictures, whatever they're doing, you always feel as if you know what's important to them rather than what's important to a viewer. So unlike many paintings by a man of a woman and child, which are about I was going to say expectation, but possibly not expectation, but the way that they're viewed, the viewer's gaze. I don't think Picasso's works are about the gaze. They're about what's inside the head of the person that they're of. That's what makes them very special for me. And if you look at this picture, the woman is, you know, she's flinging her head back so that the child is not going to grab her nose, which anybody who's ever had a baby on their knee knows that that's what happens. But the hand on the baby and the feeling, the little legs on the knee, everything about it is so physical. It's so much about that physical feeling that the woman is experiencing rather than what she looks like from the artist's point of view. So that's what I'm going for. And yes, if I could do it, I'd be thrilled.
Well, I think there are a number of examples that we can bring where I think you have managed that. So, I mean, you mentioned just now about just to rewind a little bit about composition, about how you will exaggerate features sometimes to make an image work rather than trying to be sort of photorealistic, as it were, in your depiction of.
Yeah.
I think that's a real. I'd like to take some time to put that across to people to really get a grasp of how your works work, as it's about composition and design, isn't it? And
this is incredibly important to me, and it's not something that I necessarily expect other people to notice too much, but I feel very kind of uncomfortable with bad composition generally. It jars. I think I have friends who are musicians who have perfect pitch, who have to walk out of concerts if something is slightly out of tune, where I can sit there and say that was lovely and not notice at all. And I feel a little bit like they describe that when I see a picture that's badly composed. And it's difficult to describe exactly what badly composed means. I think mostly it's about the viewer's eye wandering out of the rectangle, or not somehow being led around in a satisfyingly balanced way into the focus of what's important in the picture. So when I start a painting, I usually start drawing with a pencil first on the canvas, and before any paint goes on at all, I'm correcting thousands of times from the first drawing until it's right. Unfortunately, there's no formula for getting it right, and so it's not anything that can be planned.
You know when it's right, yeah, and that's the thing. There are these little calibrations in terms of composition, in terms of the drawing.
Yeah.
To get to a point, you've likened it to, as you say, tuning an orchestra. You know, so everything's
yeah. I mean, yes, to go back to the musical analogy, when I start a painting, I start with a drawing, and I start with, as I said before, kind of closing my eyes and putting myself into that position and feeling the feeling in this particular painting that's on the screen now, feeling the feeling of that little shoulder of the child and the kind of curling up together. And I start to try to draw what that feels like. And then standing back, that's when the visual part comes in, because then it's not right. And so I'm correcting the shapes as if they were abstract, almost jigsaw puzzle shapes that need to fit together until it goes quiet. So to start with, it feels in my head, when it's wrong, quite noisy, as if it's like an orchestra tuning up. So there's lots of noise, and bit by bit, as the lines find where they should be, it gets quieter until, and then that continues with the painting. So then I add color, and then things have to move again, because it doesn't work quite the same in color as it does in black and white. So I start really with lines, but then when you've got tones, that changes everything again. And I keep on correcting until somehow the painting is finished, and that's mostly when it goes really silent and still. So what I want from my pictures, which is not necessarily what all good pictures should be by any means. I think there are some painters who actually aim for the opposite of this. But what I aim for is silence and stillness, so that every shape is in the right place and can't move anymore. And it gives, when they're finished, they do, then afterwards, they do tend to have resolved themselves often into a kind of spiral or a cross or some.
That's very interesting. I think I highlighted this piece particularly watching Maisie with Lois, because I think it makes that point very beautifully. You have the diagonal there, which is the fundamental part of the composition, but this wonderful idea of a spiral or a curling into the picture plane, which expresses exactly what is meant to be happening in what we are looking at is happening. This wonderful cuddle on the sofa with your granddaughter. It's wonderful how that actually works. But the point I guess that comes across is this is instinctive from you. It's it's something that you have to find your way to. It's not as if you start off with a spiral and a diagonal and then create a picture around that.
It would be lovely if that were possible, but somehow because there's subject matter in here as well. It's not just an abstract painting. That's not possible anymore. When I was a student at the Slade, in my first couple of years, I started off by painting purely abstract paintings, and they were in some ways quite similar to what I'm talking about now. There was a lot of juggling shapes and colours into kind of satisfying, balanced compositions, but with no subject matter. They were completely abstract. And after a couple of years, I kind of bored myself with them a lot, so that I kind of couldn't be bothered doing another one. And what I realized now was that I was kind of tuning a skill of abstract painting, but it wasn't enough. That the subject matter was what was missing, and that involved a lot of soul searching and a lot of a willingness to expose myself in a way that the abstract paintings didn't. So for me, it's massively important that these paintings work as abstract compositions, and that they have that balance. But I also want to say something that comes from my heart or from my stomach, that goes to other people's hearts and stomachs, something that means something. The narrative is equally important. Yeah. So I suppose there's the tension between the narrative and the abstract that need to both work.
To stress, isn't it, that there is a fundamental pure geometry in your works, which is why they work so well as compositions. And I think that's where we find that. I think, certainly from my point of view, what I enjoy about the work and how they make me feel is not just the narrative, but it is down to the fundamental designs, the purity of geometry, harmony, the balance that you achieve. And that is down to mathematics in a way, isn't it? But there is also this wonderful narrative charge to it that is so important. And so they're not just that. You couldn't just do that in pure abstraction, could you?
I think I could, but I don't think I would be satisfied with that. I mean, I just need to push that a little bit further. Yes, they could be decorative, but sometimes people say to me, "Oh, I love your pictures make me feel so calm. I think it must be the expression on the faces." And I don't actually think that is the reason that they feel calm. I think they feel calm, I think they feel calm because of that silence and balance. That if your eye is led in a satisfying way around through the eyes of the people in the picture to the focal point of what they're thinking about, it's calming. I mean, I think the opposite is someone like Lucian Freud, for example, whose pictures are extremely uncomfortable, and they're uncomfortable on purpose. I'm not saying Lucian Freud's not good enough. I'm saying Lucian Freud's pictures are trying to do pretty much the opposite of what I'm trying to do. There's a naked body and they're kind of falling off the edge of the picture, and it just feels the compositions feel weird and uncomfortable, and they make the the fragility of the human being in there much more apparent because of that discomfort. But for my kind of work, which is totally different from that, I'm looking more to my real favorite artists, which are, you know, the early Renaissance painters who did use mathematics quite self-consciously.
Anita, we'll have a moment to come to that later.
Okay, right, we'll go back to that.
But I just wanted to put up here, feeding the guinea pigs, again, another illustration of what you're talking about. The way you take our eye around, a journey around the square of the composition within it, via the eyes, as you say, and moving around this beautiful, fluid, rhythmical lines down to the focal point where the guinea pigs are being fed there. It's just wonderful. And I think,
thank you.
Again, it really does highlight the strength, what you're doing, the absolute strength of composition here is vital, because it's about creating something. You mentioned it's about something, this self-contained object in its own right. There's a strength of the actual visual object, which doesn't refer to a world outside of the picture frame or anything like that. They're worlds, they're windows, or almost, although windows is the wrong word, isn't it? They're worlds in their own right, which is how you describe these. And
yes, I think yeah,
visual architecture to create that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think that I've always really wanted my pictures to be beautiful objects, not windows on the world. So not I don't expect anybody to expect that the figures continue on outside the picture. I mean, obviously, you know, you would think that the woman in this picture has legs and the child, but that those are not the important part of the picture, and therefore they're not there. But the shapes around the figures and between the figures, even the little kind of funny shape that of the background that's between them, are so carefully fitted together that that the picture itself becomes an object of, hesitate to use the word reverence, but I do think that I kind of want them to be like an icon themselves. I want them. I want to be celebrating celebrating the moment and giving it much more power than it would have if it was just happened to be a square window that you could just happen to see people passing by.
I think that's important. I mean, without wanting to invest it with any sort of religious meaning, these works, but icon is wonderful. I think it does bring a special power and an enhanced power to the image, because you've taken so much care to create it in its own right, as it were. It doesn't refer to a world outside. There's a wonderful intensity to it. It's a visual intensity, which also brings an emotional intensity as well. And it's quite different. I mean, you mentioned photos earlier on, and this whole idea of a window on the world. I put this up, the photo album, acrylic on canvas, again, 2021. So a lovely, wonderful recent piece. Because people often say, oh, what you're doing is creating a photo album of your world, of your life. That's not what you're doing, is it?
Well, no, not really. Although, interestingly, when I've been putting together some older prints, or trying to kind of find photographs of all of my old work going back 40 years for the retrospective exhibition that's happening next year, I do see that I have been creating a story all the way along, a story that started with myself as a student, and then my 2 pregnancies, my babies, them growing up, my marriage, my grandchildren, my grown-up children. And yes, there's something of that is a photo album. But what I've always wanted to do is to search for the universal. So what I hope is that it's kind of everyone's photo album, not just mine. In the same way as any art that I find moving makes me feel that it's mine, rather than that it's just the artist either showing off or talking about their own world.
Well,
so yeah.
You know, and it's also, I think, importantly, not time specific either, is it? I mean, photos are of a specific moment in time. You're trying to actually create something.
Absolutely. What I really don't want is time specific. It's interesting because I noticed when looking at some of my favorite paintings from the early Renaissance, something that changed in paintings around 1500 was that there started being this little white dot in the eye of figures in the paintings that immediately brings a figure to life. And it's very easy to do. It's a little trick, you know, like with these dark eyes, if I just put a little white dot in there as a reflection, suddenly like faces light up. And I have tried that because I kind of want, as a trick, because I wanted to make the faces light up. And then I immediately always get rid of it, because what it does is it then puts that figure in a certain light, in a certain room, in a certain moment. And I don't want a certain moment. I want every moment, and every woman with every granddaughter looking at every photo album. And anything too specific is an interference with that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and it's you're trying to make something enduring that is out of time almost. And
yes, yeah.
What occurred to me when looking at this the selection of work for this show is that there is this gorgeous tension in your work between creating something so robust, enduring. I mean, we've talked about them being monuments almost, or icons, to very fleeting moments. That's the point. They're elusive. And I think that these elusive moments in life, which again, they would usually get overlooked if they're not recorded as special occasions or anything like that. They're what goes on in between the sort of big events almost.
Absolutely. It's what George Eliot said about the golden moments in the stream of life slip through your fingers. And it happens to all of us that, you know, while we're planning and hoping for the next great event and, you know, wedding and birthday and holiday, what is happening every day is the real thing that we would miss most. If we were stuck in a prison cell somewhere, we wouldn't be wanting a holiday on the beach. We would be wanting to sit and have breakfast with our family. And so it's those tiny little moments that we do overlook. I somehow want to celebrate them, cherish them, make a monument of them, make them big. I do like my figures to be bigger than life size. I find that, you know, when I have to do smaller paintings just for practical reasons, it's very difficult to get a whole figure in there. You know, to do a painting with a figure that includes, you know, the head and the feet and the arms, the natural size for me is well over life size. And that's not something, that's just something that happens instinctively. The figures just grow and grow. But I really want them to be big, monumental, solid things to celebrate how important those moments are.
There's nothing heroic in that either. It's not sort of Soviet gargantuan, something like that, is it? It's more about, I think there's a sense almost votive in this, that you're taking so much care over the composition. You're investing so much, you know, love into these works, into moments that, you know, again, are fleeting and transitory, that confers real value upon them. And I think that's also that means that they resonate widely. You know, they're not personal to you as such, although they come from a person. They're able to speak to a wider audience because of that whole element.
Absolutely. I think votive is a good word. And there's also something about maybe jewelry that or something, when there's a huge amount of value invested into one object, it's then it's valuable, not in a monetary sense, but in a, you know, what is most valuable to us in life, really.
Well, I think that certainly comes across. I've just flicked through a couple of new works. I loved Snakes and Ladders, wonderful. And this again is on a large scale. I think it's the largest piece in the show, and one of your more recent works. It's well worth looking at. It incorporates all the things we've just been talking about in terms of composition and intensity and but also a wonderful who's winning there? Do you have any idea who's
Certainly not me. I think it's really important to let children that age win. It's quite difficult with snakes and ladders, but it's
but that's what I mean. Again, and striving for something timeless there. I wanted to talk about your printmaking as well, and then we have here a sequence of works: Family Birthday. We have Passover 2020 and Family Gathering. Now, these are all, there's obviously something pointing about that. These are all directly related to this year and lockdown last year, where these are almost surrogates for events, gatherings that should have happened but didn't.
Yeah.
So
yes, I mean, I found, I don't know about anybody else, but I found it a good way of coping with lockdown was to have a routine. And one thing that I did, I'm lucky enough to have a studio that's just around the corner from where I live. And so I went to the studio 5 days a week, and at weekends I stayed at home. I actually painted at home as well as at the studio, but it was somehow just a way of breaking up the time and feeling some sense of it not all going into one big mush. But there were along the way events like family birthdays and like Passover that we couldn't celebrate as a family. And so it became, when I could see these events coming up in the calendar and knowing that we weren't able to do them, I made these little lino cuts just kind of instead, really, or as a way of marking that they should have happened.
They're sort of postcards to yourself almost of things.
Yeah, yeah.
They're reminders. And as I say, so a substitute, is there a way that's the work in this show has been a way of replacing the emotional, hole, I suppose, that lockdown has?
I don't know. I don't think it's actually possible to replace those things with anything. It's kept me busy. Not really, no, but I suppose that it has that just as these events passed, they gave me extra subject matter because I might not have even noticed them if they'd actually happened. But the fact that they didn't happen, I noticed them more.
I think it makes it more fun. I mean, it's a reminder of what we've all lost over the last year or so. And I think you've meditated, or you've reflected on that quite powerfully, I think, about how we will come to recognize the sacrifice that this has been. You've likened it actually to being in the war. I mean, I know I don't want to make a sort of a jarring parallel there, but I think you said something quite interesting about that, is that during the war you're at least able to, you're at least able to have contact with your family, and there was lots of deprivation.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I really hesitate to make that comparison. Sitting at home and watching Netflix is not really comparable with your son or husband being off at the Western Front. But there was certainly, it was worse than we could have imagined, not being able to see our families. And yes, on the home front during the war, if you weren't living in an occupied country, if you were in England, maybe you did have the comfort of other people. People could still hug each other. And I think until this year, I think we may all have underestimated how important it is to hug other people, to touch other people, and to have that physical closeness with your family in particular. It has been a huge thing to be taken away from us, and it's just a very big part of what makes us human, that we need to be close physically to other people.
No, I think that obviously, and again relates back to what we were talking about earlier. It's actually the precariousness of the subject matter of your work. It gives it this wonderful emotional charge to it. It is about how there is, everyone talks about the joy in your work, but I guess it does acknowledge there's a sadness there as well, because that's the other side of this coin, isn't it? That it could
I mean, this is something that again, like with the composition, I don't know that people necessarily know or care about in my work. Obviously, everybody brings their own thing to a picture that resonates with them in some way. But for me, you know, especially when I talk to young people, if I ever teach in an art college, a question that often comes from very young people is, where is the sadness? Where is the pain? Why is everybody always happy in these pictures? And I think my answer to that is always, you know, wait until you're 60 and see if you still ask that question. That it's because there is no such thing as a life that doesn't have pain and difficulty. We all go through difficult times. We all feel sad. We all feel unhappy in various ways. But I want to grasp onto and celebrate the fleeting moments of joy that we might not even notice if we're too caught up with talking about pain, really. So, but it's the pain of the precariousness of life, the fear that we all have that we might not have this tomorrow, which I seem to feel in a quite heightened way compared to most people, is the impetus for my work. So paradoxically, pictures that seem very happy are actually they're about the knife edge of being human, I think, for me.
Interesting way of putting that. I think the knife edge is actually wonderfully put there. And you mentioned, and I get the feeling you've been wanting to talk about this all during our conversation, but I think I wanted to bring in the art of the early Renaissance, another impetus for your work, well, a real drive for what you do and the way you do it, I suppose.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the early Renaissance being where a lot of your, you know, which is a real drive for a lot of what you're doing. Can you talk to us a bit about why that's the case? You know, what do you find in the work? Again, this is Masaccio, The Distribution of Arms and the Death of Ananias. This is another work you highlighted for us in that talk recently.
I think well, it's difficult to really put your finger on what it is about certain works of art that make you that move you. And you know, we all just know that when you see something that really moves you, you know you're in the presence of something that can move you to tears, and it's very difficult to say why. But when we were talking before about icons and the votive aspect of what I'm doing, medieval arts, so anything from, I suppose, about the 4th century to the 14th, was in Western art, was very much icons. Really, a lot of Madonna and Childs that are pretty indistinguishable from each other. You know, you don't know who the artist is a lot of the time, and they were these very powerful religious objects. And then, of course, the Renaissance happened, starting with Giotto in the 13th century. And for me, it's the transition of from icons to the later pictures done, say, in the 16th century, which are all about the individual. And there's this gap of a couple of hundred years where Western art was transitioning between icons to art about individual, ordinary people, that always moves me, that always makes me feel that there's something in there that I want for my own work. And what I think it is these early Renaissance works keep the sense of object, the sense of design, the sense of the icon. They're often, the artists themselves were also mathematicians, but there's a very tight, careful design about where the objects are placed. These people are not just kind of walking past. They're absolutely placed very carefully, as are the buildings. And there's a kind of solidity to the figures which is not absolutely true to life. It's the kind of, there's a monumentalness about them as well. There's that business I was talking about before where there's no light in their eyes because they're not a person in a garden or in a room. They're much more iconic. They're much more every person. So these pictures, and they're often frescoes, and they're often on church walls in Italy, the ones that I really resonate with. They just seem to, it's like the icon has allowed the ordinary person in and has made the ordinary person as special as a god, that suddenly the ordinary is as worthy of adoration as something religious, and that's what I'm aiming for.
I think put it beautifully. These are works that include the viewer and confers dignity and beauty on the ordinary and depicts it as miraculous. And I think that sums up beautifully what you're talking about. And I love this idea of this pivot in the development of Western art, as it were. And there's this moment that so much of what you've been talking about can be found, you know, and that really is wonderful. It also, its ability to communicate still 600 years later or so. I think that's something that you've remarked about. You would love your work to be able to be, you know, have this universal sort of, you know, 600 years hence, and I'm sure it will.
Yeah, no, but this is my aim. I mean, you know, there's something obviously for all artists about immortality. You know, you want your work to speak to people in many hundreds of years. You know, if anybody was in 600 years was looking at my work like I'm now looking at Masaccio, it would be, you know, absolutely wonderful. But mostly because I can still feel the feeling of that woman's arm with a little baby's bottom on it. And so I know that she was just like me. And that's incredibly comforting. The fact that we're not alone with each other, that we're all much more similar to each other than we think. And that goes back through history, that all of those people felt just like we do. And that for me is an incredibly powerful thing. I sometimes just imagine, particularly the downstairs chapel in San Francesco in Assisi. I sometimes imagine when I'm doing one of my paintings and I'm getting near to the end, and I just kind of think if I could just sneak it into a little corner chapel, not a major altarpiece or anything, but just somewhere in a corner, would it be okay? Would it make people smile? Would it somehow fit in with that feeling of these are ordinary people just like us, and yet aren't they? Isn't life a miracle? That would be my aim, if one of those pictures could just fit in there.
Well, very timely then to bring this work to bear. Almost as if we prepared this earlier.
You prepared this earlier, didn't you, Vincent?
No, I think this sums that up beautifully, the idea of the miracle.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous work that in this show, and I think sums up a lot of what you're talking about in terms of the relationship with early Renaissance art. And thank you for again expressing that for us this evening. I think that link is very powerful, and as ever, I'm always struck by artists talking about other artists, and you're a wonderful guide to the early Renaissance for us. So I do appreciate that. I think we are. I think there must be some questions. I hope that we can, you know, bring some. Contributions from people who've been watching, and I wonder if Alistair, I wonder if there are any people who have some questions for us this evening.
Well, firstly, just thank you both so much. That was such an incredible journey that you've taken us on, from the early Renaissance to the everyday, to the universal. It's been just fantastic. So thank you both so much. And yes, let's have a look at the questions. There are quite a few. Anita, the first one is, hi Anita, I love your work. Lucky to own 2 screen prints. I would love to know what it was like being mentored by Paul Orrego, another artist I admire, at the Slade. And I think I'd like to know the answer.
Okay, so yes, thank you very much. I was incredibly lucky to meet Paula when I was a student. She was only teaching at the Slade one day a week to start with. And it was, as I mentioned earlier, I did start my art school career by painting these very abstract pictures. And I, after a couple of years, bored myself with them so much and had a bit of a crisis, which is quite common for art students, of thinking, I don't know why I'm here. I really have made a mistake. I'm not an artist. I'm bored with doing this now and I don't know what to do next. And I pretty much destroyed all my abstract paintings. I'm pleased to say I've kept one, but they're all gone. And I was very upset by this, really, and thought maybe I should leave. And luckily the Slade is a 4-year course, so that was in my second year, so I had plenty of time. And I went home and just thought, why am I at art school? And what I kept on coming back to was that when I was a child, I always drew my everyday life. And so I thought, I'll just try that. I'll try doing some little drawings of my everyday life. And I did some little tiny drawings, really, of my day, like waking up in the morning, having a shower, having breakfast, getting on the tube, as little kind of comic strips. And they were very small and they were in sketchbooks, and I kind of hid them away. The Slade was very peculiar, actually, that as students, we were divided into different studios to work in. We each had a little corner, but we were divided into studios depending on what kind of work we did. So I was in the abstract studio. So doing these little pictures, these kind of almost cartoon-like pictures of myself and my day, just felt so shameful and embarrassing and really like not proper art at all. And so I hid them away. And one day I came back from lunch and Paula was sitting in my space and she said, I've just been looking through your sketchbook. And of course I went bright red and thought, oh no, this is terrible. And she said, these are really good. You just have to keep on doing this. And it was the kindest thing that anybody has ever said to me at one of the lowest points in my life. And we talked a lot. And at the time, she was doing the pictures, her drawings, and she was learning printmaking, but she was doing the pictures of the dog and the girl feeding the dog. And we talked a lot about how, if you felt that you were really a drawer, that how you could make paintings out of drawings. And we found our way up to the printmaking department at the Slade together. So Paula and I learned etching together, amazingly enough. And I wasn't supposed to be there because I was an undergraduate and it was a postgraduate department. And she, I suppose, wasn't really supposed to be there because she was a visiting lecturer one day a week. So we became kind of friends, and I went to her studio and we had lots of talks about drawing, and she was just incredibly encouraging. And I had a couple of years later, when I was in my final year, had a few pictures in a group exhibition in Swiss Cottage Library. And bless her, she came along to the private view of this exhibition and brought me this huge bunch of flowers and said, this is going to be the first of many. You're going to do, you know, brilliant things, and your work is good. And, you know, she just had faith in me, which was fantastic. She was incredibly kind. And of course, I now know as well that her life was really very difficult at that time. Her husband, Victor, was incredibly ill, and she was juggling her own family problems. But she made time for me in a way that I will never forget. She was the kindest person and the most encouraging, and I owe her a huge amount.
And Anita, if I make this just a moment, just to bring this up with reference to Paula Rego, the comparison has been made. I couldn't resist back in. Can you tell us what somebody said about this work?
Yeah, well, I don't know whether this is somebody who's even listening right now, but somebody contacted me a couple of days ago, actually, and said, I've just picked up this card, this hugging the children. And I had to tell you that it really reminded me of Paula Rego, because I felt as if this woman, that there was a kind of dark underside to this picture, and this woman was going to eat the children. And he said, then I showed it to some friends of mine, and they said, no, don't be ridiculous. She's just hugging her children. But, you know, I'm quite happy for him to see that. I'm sure that there's an element of wanting to eat your children in mothers and grandmothers. So maybe Paula is still influencing me. Who knows?
Well, that was the most wonderful story. And thank you to Pippa for asking the question. And it pleased me because my last my last visit anywhere before the pandemic was to Paula's museum, Casa de las Historias.
Wonderful.
Yes, there are some wonderful similarities too. So thank you for that, Anita. We've got lots of questions, so I'm going to look at a couple more that we've got here. So yes, looking through all of these, here's one that I'd like to ask you. So one of our participants has asked, the scale, or observed, the scale of your figures are really intriguing. They have the weight and depth of sculpture. Are you influenced by three-dimensional art as well as paintings?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I look at sculptures a lot. Someone like Henry Moore, Henry Moore's drawings have been very important to me. I mean, I will, you know, I'll look at anything, steal from anyone, really. But yeah, sculpture is has been very. Henry Lawrence is another sculptor who I really like. Henry Moore, Henry Lawrence, obviously all the Renaissance sculptors, Michelangelo. But I have not really done much sculpture myself. I mean, I think I've got a real job trying to do a perfect painting. So I think I'm not gonna be making sculptures anytime soon. But yes, I'm flattered that you think that they're sculptural.
Thank you. Now we've got loads and loads of questions, so I'm going to just ask you a few more. So this is from Tanya, who's asked, do you make your prints before or after your paintings?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I do both, actually. Nearly always these days the paintings come first, but not always. I'm actually working on a painting now that was a print first. Painting and printmaking just go together for me. They're part of the same process. Sometimes I will do a little black and white print that then I think that actually would make a good painting. And in fact, this painting, Hugging the Children, started as there was a lino cut first. But more often the painting comes first, and then I think with my kind of experience of printmaking, there's so many different printmaking techniques, and each one has its own language and its own sort of emotion that it specializes in. So, you know, lino cuts and woodcuts can be very graphic and punchy, whereas, say, a lithograph or a screen print could be much more soft and washy. And those sort of things occur to me sometimes with paintings, where I think I'd really like to try it in another medium where I could really intensify that feeling. So I work between printmaking and painting, and it goes both ways.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much. And so amongst our many questions, another one that I wanted to ask from one of our participants, I'm interested in the quality of your lines and mark making in your printmaking, and how glorious your prints are alongside your glowing paintings, which have different quality. So that's more of a comment.
Thank you very much, whoever said that.
Very, very positive one. Let's have a look through these questions. As an ex-art student, your comment about not knowing what your art is about really resonated with me. I wondered what your opinion of the current state of art education is.
Oh dear, I don't think you should get me on. I don't think you should get me on my soapbox, really. I don't do any teaching, and I'm not overly impressed with what I see in art schools at the moment. Generally, I hesitate to judge because I don't go to many art school shows anymore. But sometimes I do have, you know, a student. I think the A-level syllabus has a part of it that they have to study a living artist, and so quite often I get students sending me a list of questions for their A-level project, and sometimes they show me their own work, and often it's, you know, really lovely little self-portrait or something, and then 3 or 4 years later they invite me to their degree show, and I'm just devastated by walking into a room with a neon light in the corner or something and thinking, what happened to that person, really? I think the problem is art has just become a very broad term, and there's an awful lot of things going on that are perfectly valid, but that having thrown out painting is a great shame. I think that there are some fantastic painters around whose work hardly ever gets seen, and certainly never gets recognized, and certainly never gets reviews or never gets in major collections, because it's just not fashionable. And I think, you know, as an artist, you have, if you're really honest with yourself, you have no choice what to do. I couldn't just think I'm going to do some conceptual work because it's fashionable. I'm not interested in you know, shocking for the sake of getting a review in a major newspaper. And I think a lot of what's going on in art school at the moment is taught by people of my age and generation, or maybe even younger, who never even really learned to draw themselves, and have just lost, we've lost the ability to draw and to talk about drawing. I hope that's just a fashion, and I hope that will come back. But at the moment, I wouldn't have been very confident if one of my children had wanted to study fine art, put it that way.
So interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Emma asks, do you receive the responses of experts, in inverted commas, differently to the responses of, in inverted commas, ordinary people who appreciate your work? So do they elicit different responses in you, Anita?
I don't often hear what experts think, to be honest. I mean, experts are ordinary people, aren't they? I don't know. I mean, do you know what? Some people like my work and some people don't. And luckily for me, I only usually ever hear when people like it, because people don't usually throw abuse at me. I mean, I'm sure there are many people who don't like my work, and I just don't hear from them. And probably a lot of maybe who you're talking about as experts might just be these people who you know, write the reviews in newspapers and whatever, and I don't get those reviews, so I don't know. Maybe the experts don't like my work, but I do what I do, you know. I do what I do, and if people, I'm far too old to actually care that much, really. I'm thrilled if people like my work enough to want to have it on their walls, then that is good enough for me.
Well, that sounds pretty good. And I've got a question from Phil, who asks, does printmaking bring a different language to your work? Do you paint and print most subjects, or do you choose different techniques based on subject? And we've talked a little bit about that, but I wonder if
no, I definitely, with printmaking, with printmaking, I definitely choose the technique according to the subject. Having been at art school for 7 years, I did postgraduate printmaking at the Slade as well. So I had a lot of time to get very familiar with a lot of different printmaking techniques, which I think it's like speaking a lot of languages. So anybody who does speak more than one language will know that there are some things that it's easier to express in one language or another. And the same is true of printmaking, that there are just certain emotions that are just need a really big punchy woodcut, and other emotions that just really need a watery washy lithograph. And I will just go with whatever I think is going to bring out the essence of the emotion in a picture.
Just if I may say, I find the dialogue between painting and printmaking with the artist printmakers that we work with really fascinating. I think there's something, I think printmaking brings a quality to the painting and vice versa. And I think Anita's the perfect example, a very versatile printmaker, and you can see over a lot of different media, which you're fluent in many languages.
It was certainly with printmaking. They've got to be. The thing with printmaking is that you've got to have an ease. You've got to have done enough of them that you don't feel put off by the technique, because I think prints can become quite dead if they're just about technique. You have to be able to use the technique as if you were speaking a foreign language, rather than, you know, I think when you first do printmaking, it is a bit like speaking a foreign language with a dictionary. You know, you're constantly, the dictionary is more important than what you're trying to say. And as you get fluent, then you can express whatever you want with printmaking in ways that, you know, there are marks that you just can't make any other way, and that's why I keep doing it, because you know, if I could make those marks with a paintbrush or a pencil, I would, but you can't.
Well, as Vincent said, wonderful to be fluent in so many languages. If we've got time, just for one or two more questions. There's a very interesting question here. Have you made any works for religious spaces, even though you were not religious? And we were of course just admiring the miracle. So have you ever made work for religious spaces, Anita?
I haven't. I would love to. You know, I would love to be given a chapel like Stanley Spencer was and asked to. That would be my dream come true. I would do it for any religion. I'm not fussed. I did once do some stained glass angels for a church, but it was not a church in use as a church anymore. It was a family home, some people who were converted a church, and I did 2 huge stained glass angels for an internal window, which was a fantastic commission. I think it was they actually phoned me up and said, do you do commissions? And I started on my usual thing of saying no, I don't, because I thought they were going to ask me to do, I don't know, a blonde family or sons or something that I don't have any experience of, and I was going to start explaining how I can only do things if they're self-portraits. And then they said, oh, that's a shame, because we've got a church and we'd like some angels. And I said, well, when I say I don't do commissions, I absolutely jumped at it. So yeah, I would love to, but nobody's asked me.
Well, we're going to have to watch this space. I have to say we've got a chapel, but
yes, it's already decorated.
Already decorated by Mary. And perhaps a good question and observation to end on is one here from one of the participants. It says, 2020 has been an extraordinary year. Hopefully we are now moving to brighter times and certainly more precious family moments. What's next for you, Anita?
I'm hoping to go to Italy with my family in July, and that will be such a wonderful celebration after being separated from them that yeah, that's what's next for me. Let's hope we can. Otherwise, you know what, I will just hug my grandchildren and make meals every week for my grown-up children and absolutely enjoy every minute of it.
Wow. Whichever it is, I hope.
Whichever it is,
whichever it is. I was about to say, let's hope it's Italy, but the alternative is also wonderful too. So, as you say, it's about seeking joy. And I just wanted to apologise to those participants whose questions we haven't got to, but I wanted to take this opportunity, Anita and Vincent, to thank you both so much for such a wonderful, immersive conversation, both about your artistic practice, your technique, your inspiration, the journey that you've been on. There are so many parts of your conversation that really resonated, and I think one that really sort of stuck with me, I suppose, is the ordinary as worthy of adoration, as worthy of adoration as the religious. And I thought that was rather wonderful. And also this notion of perhaps the every woman as well, and the universal, I think, is so special in your work. So Anita, thank you so much. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Vincent for all of his insightful questions, to thank the team at What's Contemporary, Narissa, Joe, and many, many others, and really just you, the audience, and if you haven't seen the exhibition at What's Contemporary, please do come and see it. It's on until the 4th of July. I think it's fair to say that every work is available for sale, either via our online shop or at the gallery. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning, all of the works also support our mission and vision of art for all in the community. So there's almost a sort of double benefit there. So thank you so much to everyone for listening. Thank you again, Anita and Vincent, for the most fascinating conversation. And in the meantime, I think we can all take solace and inspiration from your beautiful work.
Thank you so much, Alistair. Can I just say that if anybody did want to ask a question and they haven't been able to, just ask me on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram and ask me the question. I'd be happy to answer. It's Anita Klein Art on Instagram, and I'll answer any questions you've got that you didn't get answered.
Well, thank you so much, Anita. And I really think this is the perfect art for this moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you again at What's Contemporary.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
good night.
Have a really
Thank
great
you.
evening.